After playing with bands in garages and basements, Jimmy Griffin's group Broken Toyz became a huge hit in the Midwest. The band played a mix of originals and covers, then changed their name to the single word King of the Hill. They signed with the labels, started playing concerts, and steadily grew in popularity. Playing many gigs, dedicated to rehearsing and honing his craft, Jimmy founded the Incurables, a band that released some great albums, as his reputation as an incredibly gifted guitarist grew steadily. Jimmy became a much sought-after player with a variety of tribute acts: Street Fighting Band, Celebration Day, and El Monstero, the Pink Floyd tribute band that plays multiple sold-out shows in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Springfield. There's also the Hard Promises, a Tom Petty tribute band. With that schedule, Jimmy still finds time to work at killer vintage guitars and instruct kids at Camp Jam in the summer. He also found time to have a great talk on frets. You're listening to Frets with DJ Fey. No lessons, no technique info. I just talk to people who play guitar. Stay tuned. Well, for the listeners, this is a first. Instead of coming to you from the Frets studio, we're recording this evening at the rehearsal space of guitar great Jimmy Griffin. Jimmy, thanks for inviting me here tonight.
Oh, thanks for coming. I totally would have come to you. I just thought this would be fun just because there's so much stuff all over the place.
It's visually wonderful, and this is great. Were you originally from Cincinnati?
I grew up in Cincinnati.
Okay.
I moved to Cincinnati when I was 6, and I left when I was 15. But a big, good chunk of my adolescence was there. And I still have a bunch of friends there, that a lot of them still play music or are in instruction or things like that. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'll take some Skyline if you got it.
And was guitar the first instrument you learned?
Yes, the only instrument. Okay. It was Ace Frehley. It was that guy, It was that record completely changed my entire trajectory in life, as silly as it seems now. It was, I didn't think they were people. I thought they were like seriously from another planet.
Right.
And,
I'm starting to ask that more because I was actually surprised by a couple guests I talked to who I learned, that they started out on the drums a lot of them, I think started out on piano, but
right.
Guitar players who I had no idea were drummers as well. So
my problem, I tried to start piano when I was probably about 14, but I'd already been playing guitar for about 2 years, and I was halfway decent at that. And so then going all the way back to the beginning with piano, I screwed myself because I was like, well, I'm just, this is hard and I'm good at guitar.
Yeah.
As good as I was at 14,
I said for years that since I knew how to play guitar, I really wanted to learn piano or keyboards, and I just never pursued it I stuck with guitar myself. So.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I do want to talk about early bands like Broken Toyz and King of the Hill. Mm-hmm. And by the way, my only small world connection to that is that Frankie's dad, Frank Muriel Sr., was in my dad's harmonica quartet years ago.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
My dad was very involved in the Gateway Harmonica Club organization in St. Louis.
Frank Sr. was, he was all over that, totally.
Yeah, they were really good friends, and they had a quartet of harmonica players, and they played gigs around town.
Can you imagine like 3 hours of harmonica?
Yeah, it's like mostly I think to old folks' home and stuff like that. Those were their gigs.
My friend Eric calls the harmonica the soundtrack of poverty.
Perfect. And I only met Frankie Jr. once after seeing like Dr. Gervais. I went with some friends, and I think he was pretty wiped out after the show or from the show. So,
he can be very
we said hello.
courteous.
That was about it. So there was also Neptune Crush.
Yeah, there was Neptune Crush in there. And Full On Venus was the predecessor of Neptune Crush. And that basically was myself and Eric Lysett. And it started with Vito from King of the Hill. That was Full On Venus. And a guy named Jeff Gallo was the bass player. And then Jeff got out and we got in with Tony Pearson, who was in a band called Radio Iodine.
Yeah, sure.
And Tony was doing a lot of production work, and he really liked how Eric and I played off of each other. And Full On Venus, if you wrote the song, you sang the song. So we had 3 lead singers, basically, which I thought was really cool. But there's something to be said for having that singular voice, you know? Yeah. And so I took a step back and went more into making a guitar sound like a keyboard for a couple of years. And Tony, and we were all into different things that were happening at that time. Sparkle Horse was a big thing.
Yeah.
It was huge. And like, that's when I found that record and I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Sparkle Horse, and you've got OK Computer happening around that time. And like all those things where people were playing guitars, but they were doing things sonically with guitars that weren't, traditional, which I liked. So I had a ton of pedals and all those kinds of things.
Oh, Johnny Greenwood thing. And,
yeah.
And you did a stint in Nadine?
I did. Nadine was probably one of my favorite bands that I ever played in. And it was such a giant step for me. And that's something I've always tried to do, is do things that I am not comfortable with. And I think that makes you grow just huge steps as a musician, is stepping into something that is not your ball of wax.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from those guys. I loved those songs. I loved those records. I campaigned to be in that band for like probably about 6 or 8 months. And this is back when I was in Neptune Crush and I had blue hair and painted fingernails and stuff. And Steve and Adam would come into Gravity when I was working at Gravity. And I'd be like, man, I just love your record. It's so good. And like, if there's any way I could ever play with you guys, I would love to try. And I could see them just like, what? Like that. It wasn't, and then, because Steve was playing guitar at that point, Steve Ronner was playing guitar, and then he decided to move to keyboards, which is his original instrument. And one of the things that's amazing about Steve is he learned how to play guitar in that band. That's like, okay. And those are some amazing guitar tracks. Like I worked on learning that stuff really hard. And that was a guy who just said, well, I don't like how these guitar players are playing. I'm going to learn how to do this. And he was amazing at it. And so he went back to keyboards. I came in on guitar. And at this point, I'm still playing like a big silver sparkly GMP, like a heavy metal guitar. And it had a Soldano amp, and but they worked with me through that and let me transition to that. And I played with them a couple of years ago, and we were going through some of the songs, and Adam turned to me and he was like, man, this is real. And I was like, dude, your band made me I learned how to do that stuff via that band, and that was a really huge thing for me to play with those guys. It was fun.
And on a couple we years ago, I was able to go to the rehearsal space that Nadine used downtown, like the A.D. Brown building. Yeah. We had mutual friends and that made our way through late at night through that building to their rehearsal space.
Yeah. Those guys, those great guys, great songs, great records.
Yeah.
That was again a huge part of me changing for the better, or growing in a really positive way.
Right.
Yeah.
Small man wears big shoes. Don't make him grow, just feels a little bit higher. But he's now close.
If you're a podcast addict like me, you might have thought about starting your own. I'm having a lot of fun creating and sharing my podcast, Frets with DJ Fey. It seemed daunting at first, and I had no idea how to proceed after recording my first episodes. Then I discovered Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout has helped over 100,000 people, even knuckleheads like me, launch a podcast. The tools they provide make it incredibly easy to get your thing going. They'll also help you get your podcast into all the major podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and more. You get a great-looking website, audio players to drop into other websites, analytics, and tools to promote your podcast. To get a no-risk free trial of Buzzsprout, or to find out about their low-cost monthly plan options, follow the link in today's show notes and let them know that DJ Fey sent you. Learn the ins and outs of podcasting through people who eat, drink, and breathe it. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. Now, back to mine. What other, not necessarily just guitarists, but what other influences, like when you were pretty young, I mean, who was really influencing you?
It was Ace. For like a couple of years, I really didn't listen to any other music. It was just, that was all I listened to was Kiss. And then, next would have been like Joe Perry was a big one for me. Yeah. Aerosmith was the first band that were people, and they looked like the bad kids that lived down the street that had the jean jackets that smelled weird. And that's what I loved about Aerosmith is they were my Rolling Stones. Oh, yeah. The same way people in the 60s looked at the Rolling Stones. They were the outlaws of that kind of thing. Joe Perry was a big one. Then there was like the not art rock, but some of the prog stuff. Like I loved Rush. There was a time period for that. I always loved Brian May. Was another one that like hearing those Queen records back then.
Dual leads.
Yeah. And just, those were some of the early ones. And then it kind of veered into metal for a while. Like it was Iron Maiden after that, but not necessarily because of the guitar playing, just the style and the coming out of Catholic school and being like, these guys are the worst thing I've ever seen, like this is truly evil and I'm going to hell for doing this.
And I'm loving it.
And then there was also, I mean, I can't believe I left out Eddie Van Halen was gigantic for me as a kid. Eddie and Randy Rhoads. And then after Randy, Jakey Lee was like, which is really, really tough 1-2 for like, I like Randy because he was first, but Jake, like just for tone and feel and everything out, Jakey Lee was amazing. So like those kinds of things were my earlier years. And then with King of the Hill and that whole era of guitar playing, we went out on tour with all the guitar heroes in like 1 year. It was like I was opening for George Lynch for like a month and a half. And nice. When you open for somebody like that, the first 8 heads back of rows are just dudes with their arms folded looking at you like, come on, man. And so it was him. And then it was the guy we played with, White Lion, who had another like Eddie Van Halen kind of guy. And then we opened for Extreme with Nuno Bettencourt in Europe for a month and a half. So, and that was when you play with people like that and you see how that's really done. And I was doing my amalgamation of what I thought that was. And it kind of teaches you to focus on what you do as a musician and where your strengths and weaknesses are. Right, after you get your ass handed to you a couple of times, you're like, that guy's doing what I thought I was doing, but I'm not.
Well, I know there were a lot, but what was sort of the chronology of your first band?
When I got to St. Louis, my first band was a band called Frontrunner, which was around for a long time. And that was my high school band. And I took guitar lessons at Duke Mishlak's place. You ever heard of Duke? Taught, Rich Fortis, Jerry Jost from The Urge, like Mike McLaughlin, who's another amazing guitar player, taught just about most of the guys in this town that are my age, and a lot of people after that. But anyway, there was a guy named Dan Drab. Dan wound up being in New World Spirits.
Oh, yeah.
Dan, at that point, was leaving. This is about 1986. Dan was moving to California to go to GIT. But I knew he played in a bar band. He had long hair. So when his lesson would end, I would immediately plug in my guitar and like play every cool lick I had, like really fast, while he was putting his guitar in the case. And he was leaving, and his band was like, well, what are we supposed to do? I don't, we need a guitar player. And he goes, you should hear this kid that takes lessons after me. And these guys were 22, 23 years old. And I was in high school. I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
And so they came to the Animal House and saw me playing with Frontrunner. And then they had to meet my mom and dad and let them. And this is when you were playing, like, you got there at 6 o'clock to set up. There was no PA and lights anywhere. You had to load everything in, and you would play from 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And then I would go home, and I would wake up the next day and go to high school. So I did that for about a year and a half until I had graduated. And then there was a band after that called Little John. That was Little John Polizzi and my, believe it or not, John Gore that I play with in The Hard Promises. And a couple other guys, and that band fizzled out after about a year, and that's when I met Vito, and Vito dragged me into Broken Toyz with Frankie, because those guys just played. Their thing was, we just play originals. We're not playing these stupid covers. We're not doing this.
Right.
And so I talked them into like, okay, we can do this where we do both. We'll play original songs. We'll play we'll play original songs. We'll also play covers, but we can play weird covers. We can do strange things. And that band was really weird. And we figured out a way to make it work. And that band would work like 27 days a month. And that's how we learned how to do it, was just that constant, every night, 3 hours. And you got to and there was a lot of repetition and stuff, but that's how we learned how to play, and there's nothing like that. You can sit in a room for 6 months and you go play for 3 weeks on a tour, and those 3 weeks will make you grow faster than 6 months in a rehearsal space. So then that band got a record deal, and we got on MTV and got to tour and spend a whole bunch of other people's money. And then at 23, I was spit out the bottom of the music industry, and, and then you could just kind of start over from there. Then that's when you got to figure out whether you really love it or not.
Yeah. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. If you love the sound of early rock and roll, electric blues, and rockabilly, I hope you caught my interview with Craig Straubinger, a fantastic guitarist of the legendary Trip Daddies, who now fronts his new band, the Blue Sparks.
And be yourself. It's good to have heroes, and when you're young and trying to emulate them, you certainly build up your chops, but I was always conscious of not wanting to be the guy who sounds like that guy. Whether or not it served me well, that's debatable, but I always wanted to be myself, so I'd just take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and throw it in a blender and hope that I sound like myself.
You can listen to my talk with Craig on Season 1 of Frets.
Hey, this is Jimmy Griffin, and you're listening to the Frets podcast with DJ Fey.
So speaking of cover songs and cover bands, did the idea for the tribute bands kind of come out of your days? And you were in a cover band, Tiny Cows?
Yeah,
mostly covers. Or?
Yeah, that was just that was Michael Shearer and I. Michael's from Pale Divine or The Eyes, and I was just always in awe of Michael, and he's one of the best singers I've ever worked with, and crazy, like as accomplished as at guitar as someone can be. Michael is just as accomplished as someone that sings and like can harmonies right off the bat. And so yeah, that was myself, and Brian Hilgert played congas, and Michael played guitar and sang. And then it was kind of through Michael that I got into El Monstero, because Michael had the job that I had, and it's where you guest and you sing Have a Cigar. And that was the first job I had in El Monstero, because Michael had dropped out. He was like, you guys try Jimmy. So, and then I did that until I got the the Elmo gig. But the tribute thing, like I never, if you would have told me 20 years ago, you know, dude, you're going to be in tribute bands. I'm like, what? You know, like it was never, there was no plan. It was a lot of right place, right time kind of stuff. And also as I got older, I was finding myself playing music that I did not like. And the thought of like having, you know, and I have friends that do this, you know, that work consistently and learn, you know, Lady Gaga songs and whatever. Like there was just a bunch of stuff that I didn't, and like,
wasn't your thing.
Yeah. And so the thing I love about the tributes is like I play the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Tom Petty, you know, and that's like, I can do that all day. That's all stuff I love. The other thing that's great is they only work so much. So you're not stuck around the same people all the time. And I see those guys, you know, like, hey, we're going to, you know, we rehearse really hard for a month. I don't see some of those people for like 6 months, you know, and so that you know, just don't get burned out, and it keeps it fun, you know, and it's music that you care about and you love, you know.
Well, and then Hard Promises came from...
There was Petty Cash
Junction. That's right. Johnny Cash.
Yeah. So that started with Dave and Bob Wilhite and a couple other people started that band. And they were playing it off Broadway one night. And they were like, you should come down. And the way they did that was Dave always sang all the Johnny songs. And then they would kind of pass around, like they had 3 people that sang the Tom songs. So there wasn't a focal point for Tom. And they had me get up, and I think I did Refugee at the end of the night. And I walked off the stage, and Dave walked over and he's like, dude, you should be in this band. I was like, okay. So, and that was, I want to say that was 2010. That's the only thing about the Hard Promises that I bum on is, you know, that band started in 2019. And I feel like people would look at that and go, oh, this guy just started a Tom Petty band after he died. You know, and not realizing that I've been playing that music for 13 years, you know. So, but that's, you know, when they see the band, they can go, oh, they really like this stuff.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
You were a guitar tech for Jay Farrar?
Yeah. Yeah. That was great, man. It originally started out that I got a call from Jay's manager that they were looking for a guitar player. And I sent him like some stuff with me playing with Nadine and a couple of things. And I didn't really hear back for a while. And then when I did hear back, Jay's manager, Sharon, called and she goes, well, we're doing a short run down to South by Southwest. Just want to know if you'd be on board. And I was like, oh yeah, can you get me a set list? And she was like, oh, no. We need a guitar tech. And I was like, what? And I'd never done it before. But I needed the money and it was good money. And I was like, okay. And I had no idea, like I knew who Jay was. But I was never, it wasn't music that I knew. And I think he liked that about me, was that I wasn't like a fan. And Jay's a super cool guy to work for and really, really fun and super entertaining. And through that, I got to meet a guy named James Walburn, who's one of my favorite guitar players in the whole world right now. He plays in the Pretenders, and he has a new band called His Lordship that's just like screaming 50s rock. But he was the guy that got the gig, and rightly so. Like I walked into the rehearsal and I was like, who is this guy? And then he started playing. I was like, oh yeah, I'll tune that guy's guitar. He's amazing. So that was fun. It was hard because you're used to doing that. You set everything up and then you get to walk out and reap the rewards of, doing all that stuff. And then to watch other guys do it is, but again, I really liked Jay, and I really liked what they were doing. And I was also waiting around thinking I was going to get that gig. And then they went through like 3 other guys. I was like, okay, I'm not in on this. So that's when I split. And there was no hard feelings or anything. I love Jay and I love that band and
yeah.
But Jay is the only guy I've ever seen in my whole life, break brand new medium guitar strings in the first song. Like that I would have to string his guitars in between sound check and the show. And the first night I worked for him, I had strung all the guitars, and like the third song he turns around and there's like 2 strings hanging off the guitar. I'm like, what the hell? And then he did it again. He did it on an acoustic guitar. Dude, I could play a set of medium acoustic guitar strings for 4 years. Never break one. But he means it, man. He's hitting it hard. And he has really, really bad technique.
John Horton was on just a few months ago, and it was great talking to him, and I was very excited that he starting with
he's perfect for that gig. Yeah. And John's another guy that I've always we started running in it's kind of the same circle when I started doing the Nadine stuff, and that's where I really got hip to who John was and how good he was. And he would always have like his Fender amp, a Telecaster, and a little, like a TS9 or something. And I had this, again, during Nadine, I had like a MIDI rig with Soldano and a bunch of crazy pedals and switching and all kinds of reverbs and stuff. And he would walk over and he'd be like, "Hey man, what, that sounds really cool. What is that?" And I'm like, "Dude, you don't need this. You already have all the, you're doing your thing the way it is, and it sounds amazing. And this is what you have to do if you don't have what you have."
He's great.
Oh yeah.
Looking to buy a guitar, an amp, pedals? Find great deals on all of these, as well as audio and recording gear at reverb.com. You can also sell your gear through Reverb. They have great articles about music gear and bands. And Reverb believes music makes the world a better place. That's why they created Reverb Gives, that provides youth music education programs all over the world with the instruments they need to make music. Link to Reverb through Frets with DJ Fey in the show notes for this episode. One thing I wanted to ask about Killer Vintage. Been there quite a while over the years, but just curious to hear about some of the notable guitars and guitarists who've come through to the shop.
Yeah. It's crazy, dude. There's one of my favorite ones who was really nice was Billy Duffy from The Cult.
Oh, wow.
I always love them. And he hung out for a couple hours. Dave, my boss, not knowing who Billy Duffy is, has these kind of jokes that he does with whatever. And Billy was looking at a Gretsch. Now, Dave does not know that Billy Duffy is one of the foremost White Falcon guys on the planet. And I forget what his Gretsch, the best guitar a drum company could make. And he tells this joke to Billy Duffy, and I'm like, dude, don't. And Billy he's a super cool guy. But we got to talk about, have you ever heard the Manor Sessions?
No.
The Manor Sessions are the electric record before Rick Rubin got a hold of it.
Oh.
So it's that album, but soaked. So it's reverb all over the place, delays. And they met Rick Rubin. They did one song with him, and they go, "Oh, we got to switch this record up." So they basically did that record twice.
Wow.
And I wanted to ask him about that. Keith Urban, Chris Stapleton, he comes in every time he's in town, big black SUV pulls up with 2 guys, and he gets out. And he was in the shop once. We had this awesome Martin D1220 that I was going to buy, and I just kept kind of putting it off. And he goes in the acoustic room. He played a bunch of guitars. He goes in the acoustic room, and I'm hearing him play it. And I'm like, oh man, he's going to buy that guitar. This is going to suck. And he walks out and he's like, "Hey man, thanks. It was great. I'll see you guys next time." Jumps back in his SUV, goes back to the Fox. And about a half hour later, his wife calls and says, "Yeah, Chris was over there and he was playing some Martin 12-string. Can you guys bring it over to the Fox? We want to buy that." I'm like, Chris Stapleton.
The one that got away.
Yeah, Jack White.
Wow.
I'm forgetting half of them. But yeah, tons. It's a place to go. There's always something fun. I've gotten to play a couple of bursts over there. And it's the worst. It's like being a crackhead in a big pile of crack, Or if you're if you're start to look for, man, if I could find a blank, and then undoubtedly one will walk in the door or show up somehow. And yeah, it's a good place to be.
I'm one of those guys that just goes in there occasionally just to gawk, or to buy, some little accessory or something.
Well, there's a lot of stuff now. Like I don't think I've ever spent. I think the most I've ever spent on a guitar was maybe $3,000. Like I don't buy, like, if I can't play it and use it, I don't need, I don't collect guitars. Right. All the guitars I have, I play, and but it's something, there are people that want those, that want the special thing that they're gonna, and it's sad because some of them, like, if you've ever been to a vintage guitar show, like, it's kind of like looking at a tiger in a cage. You're like, man, if that thing got out, it would eat your face off. But nobody's ever going to play that guitar again. It's going to sit in some lawyer's office. Nothing against lawyers.
Showpiece.
Yeah. It's that kind of stuff. That's the sad part for me about vintage guitars is they don't get played. So.
Well, between playing in several bands and rehearsing and working at Killer Vintage, when do you find time to relax? Or do you?
I don't. I also have a 5-year-old.
Yes. So that takes up some time.
Yeah, that's the main thing. That's, that I have nights off and I come in here and I work on my own stuff. That's kind of the trade-off is what the cover things allow me is the freedom to have fun.
Do your thing.
Yeah. And to, I support myself doing this. This is how I eat. And to be able to, have those couple of nights, in between projects, or a week or months in between projects where I can just sit in here and focus on things I want to work on and develop. It's fun. Yeah.
Well, 5's pretty young, but does the 5-year-old have expressing any interest in playing an instrument yet? Or?
Not yet. Not yet. It's.
Yeah.
He has. I think it's partly because it's so accessible to him.
Oh, yeah.
Like I have, I have a laptop with like this machine program. This boxes that light up and make crazy noises and stuff. And there's always guitars around the house, and
He's seen it all.
Yeah. He's like, but we'll see. There are things that he does with music, memory wise. The one I always go back to was like 2. And when he was sitting in the car and we were listening to the Lion King soundtrack, and if you ever listen to like a Disney soundtrack, it's the 5. There'll be like 5 or 6 songs that are in the movie, and the rest of it's symphonic stuff.
Yeah.
And we're about 20 minutes, half hour into the symphonic stuff, and this motif starts reoccurring, and he says, "Run, goats, run." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Run, goats, run." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And the next time we watch a movie, I realize it's when the wildebeest go down the side of the hill. So, and he was really young, and he does that with things, Star Wars stuff. Now we listen to a lot of the John Williams stuff while we're playing with Legos. And there's the French horn, that part. As soon as that comes up, he runs out the back door and puts his foot up on the fence and looks out over what he believes to be Tatooine, Wow. So there's like, he attaches there's definitely some connection with
that
him.
association. Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Michael Goldberg's new book, Wicked Game, The True Story of Guitarist James Calvin Wilsey, goes deep into the life of a brilliant but doomed unsung genius who we lost too soon. Jimmy wasn't just a great and unique guitarist, but a music pioneer. Michael met Jimmy Wilsey in 1982 at a Silvertone gig, and a few years later interviewed him in 1987. Not long after that, they became friends. His book tells the story of a charming, incredibly talented guy who ultimately succumbed to the dark side of addiction. It's riveting, funny at times, heartbreaking and tragic, but fascinating, and hard to put down.
I mean, Jimmy basically was responsible for the sound of Chris Isaak. It was his guitar, and that really set the whole mood for those songs. That's 2 notes, the beginning of Wicked Game. That song, 30 plus years after it was a hit, is being listened to millions of times on Spotify every month.
A talk with Michael Goldberg coming soon on Frets. Well, on many of the previous Frets episodes, a subject always seems to come around because it's connected in some way to a lot of the guests, and that's Woodhouse concerts.
Oh, yeah.
I did not make it to this particular house concert, but you joined Alejandro Escovedo on Don't Need You.
I did that whole night with him.
That was great. I just again recently watched just on YouTube. Well, I think it was you posted.
If somebody posted.
Sorry, somebody posted it. Yeah. I love that. Well, I love Alejandro, but and I love Woodhouse concerts.
Yes, but, I've been lucky enough to play there twice.
Yeah.
I did one with Nadine and the one I did with Al, and that was a whole man. One of these days, I got to get him back up here. Did you see the Off-Broadway show I did with him?
No, I did not.
We can't, and it was like a Tuesday night. He and I did a little run for like 4 days. This was just an acoustic tour that we did together, and I brought him up here, and I put a band together, and it was like Dave Gorelli, Kevin Bowers, Cubby Smith, Cub's wife Kelly sang all the girl stuff. We had the Funky Butt Horns. Like it was like a band. And we rehearsed. We had 1 day of rehearsal, and we went in and did the show, and it was one of the cooler things I've ever and Al talked about that show for the next. we were riding around in the car for the next 4 days, and everybody who talked to you like, man, I just played in St. Louis and I had this great band, and
wow,
and there was like
cool.
300 people there on Tuesday, and he was just over the moon about it. And I still just want to do that again with him. It was so much fun.
A great guy. Yeah, well, I've seen him in concert quite a few times, but I think I even went at least once with Rick Wood to a Cardinal ball game. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Dude, Al, like, is another one of those guys like Jay, that has been doing it that long, still loves it, still gets out there, gives it everything. And I learned a lot watching. My wife, Mandy, actually turned me on to him. I hadn't heard of him. She's like, you got to see this guy. And we wound up meeting. I met Alejandro on a Sunvolt gig. And was like, yeah, my wife, Mandy. And he remembered they'd met in St. Louis when he was playing in the Duck Room. And it just happened. Like the next time I saw him, he was playing the pageant. And I walked in the room, and I'm like just standing there watching the band. He's like, is Jimmy Griffin here? And like I barely knew him. And I'm like, what? And he goes, come on up.
Nice.
Like, what? And I walked up and played a song with him. That kind of I've done a couple of things with him where like, hey man, this tour starts in Columbus in a week. And I was like, okay, we're going to rehearse or anything? It's like, nah, I'll see you in Columbus. And it's like 27 songs, just show up and sound check for like an hour and a half and then do a show. And then by the end of the 3 weeks, you're like, man, we got this. And then it's over.
That's great. Yeah. A lot of bands had to postpone things during the last couple of years due to the pandemic. How did that affect you, and how did you deal with all that? Probably like most people, you had to put a halt on some things.
Oh yeah, man. We were going to Kansas City and Springfield, Missouri on March the 13th and 14th of 2020.
2020.
And we got confirmation from the club and Kansas City that we would get to play. So we went, we set everything up, and then there was supposed to be a press conference with the governor at like 5:00. They said, if you don't get to play, we'll just put up some cameras and put it on the web or something. And all the gear was up, and that Elmo production is kind of a big thing. So we actually got to play. That was the last totally normal 1,000 people in a room show. They canceled Springfield the next day because they got their first COVID case. So shut down the city. So we did one gig, went back home, and we're thinking, April, May will be fine. And I didn't play another gig until July, and it was in the parking lot of Riverport, and we played to 1,000 cars.
Wow.
And there were 4 people, like 50 feet away from me, there were 4 people, and then 16 feet to the left of them were 4 people, and 16 feet to the right of them were 4 people.
So crazy.
And it was totally bananas. And that was the next gig that I did, was from March to July. And then I want to say in the fall of that year, the pageant started doing limited capacity stuff.
Yeah.
So we had 326 people in that room. And I did a bunch of shows like that. Hard Promises did a show like that. Stones did a show. The whole El Monstero run that Christmas was 12 shows in 14 days, and for 336 people a night.
Wow.
Yeah. So we tried. We were trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you still wanted to play. But we didn't do anything where we're not going to intentionally put people in a situation that could harm them.
Right. I think that was the main thing. And some people were, just figuring it out. Like, am I going to do some online shows, or am I going to just, I don't know, promote myself in a different way? But it was just, we were all just missing seeing live music so much. I mean, not that no one went, but it was just like, it was just changed so many things.
Well, that's also like our end of people, like if you could have gone 20 minutes out west and seen a band every night, there were people that were not
there were people doing
that,
it. Yeah, exactly.
And we were just on the side of not doing that. Now, I will say 2 years into this, that having learned what we've learned, and know what we know at this point, I think I'm ready to go. I'm like, I want people to be safe. I want people that could, I want to love for everybody to be vaccinated and stuff.
Right.
And just, I'm ready to move forward, having the experience and knowing what we've gleaned over the, this time period. So, but yeah, it was it was the first time in my whole life I've ever been on unemployment. Cause that was my job, was putting, a lot of people in a room, and you couldn't do it. So, luckily there were some avenues that we were able to do something, to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause we had not gone, we were playing it pretty safe, or very safe. And, I forget when that was. Sometime last year we went to see Wilco, and they had requested, or not just requested, but required a vaccination card. So we brought our vaccination card, and it was good to get out. But I'm with you. I'm ready to move. And
I went a couple of weeks ago. I went somewhere. I won't mention the name of the place, but somewhere they have not been wearing masks for 2 years anyway. And I was like, man, I'm going to go out and I'm going to jump in with both feet. And I did it, and I had to sit in my car and psych myself up for a few minutes and be like, okay, this is going to, people are going to be shaking my hand and talking to me, and there's a band on, so they're going to be kind of yelling in my face. And I got to go.
Yeah.
I got to do it,
Well, like I say, I'm vaccinated, boosted, and I'll get another booster. And it's still, I'm bringing masks to a lot of places where a lot of people aren't.
Right.
But just trying to kind of at some point, try to ease back in.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I like coffee, and I admit I've become a bit of a coffee snob. I drink coffee black because, hey, if you want to load up a cup with cream and sugar and syrups and all that, well, whatever. I want my coffee to be delicious without adding anything to it. I take the time to do pour-overs at home. I grind the beans and use my Chemex. The process is worth the wait, and when I buy beans, I buy coffee from my buddy String Bean Pete, coffee roaster and owner of String Bean Coffee. Pete's goal is to offer the finest beans from around the world. He roasts them passionately in small batches in non-computerized old-school ways to music under a disco ball. Yeah, you heard that right. He's a bit of a kook, but that's why I like him. And I really, really, really like String Bean Coffee. Find out more at stringbeancoffee.com. Well, you have a show at the pageant coming up in April. Anything else on the horizon?
Yeah, there's April 16th is the Hard Promises, which is our Tom Petty thing. And then I believe it's May the 13th at Off-Broadway. The Street Fighting Band is playing its final show before Andy goes back to Australia. We won't see him for a couple of years, so that it's kind of the farewell show for that band. And then they just announced July the 9th is El Monstero with Living Color opening at Riverport.
I did see a little promo for that.
Yeah, so that's pretty much my summer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's more stuff coming. It's just those are the ones that are out now, you know.
Well, Jimmy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk, and this was so cool doing it at your space here.
Cool. Yeah.
This is a first.
Yeah, if we're talking guitars, let's surround ourselves with guitars.
Exactly. This is the way to do it. We do this more often.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Awesome.
He not only plays a mean guitar, he has the look, he has the charisma, he has the passion. Jimmy Griffin is a rock star.
Will you feel justified at the gates when Peter pushes you aside to shove the camel through the needle's eye? Pockets full of gold.
Thanks for listening to Frets with DJ Fey. If you like the show, you can follow or subscribe for free at most podcast platforms. Hope you'll join me again next time. Stay tuned.